and welcome to Optimising Board Structure and Administration, a webinar for governing bodies. I'm Mark Campbell, one of ClubMap's co-founders. ClubMap has a unique view of sport at every level, from local to elite. And for 9 years now, we've been working with sporting organisations across the country, showing them how to create better outcomes off-field, off-court, off-pitch, and behind the scenes, so they can create an environment for better outcomes in competition, participation, enjoyment, and connection to community. It's an approach that's based on the lessons learned from more than 100 years of collective sport administration experience and wisdom. Your hosts for today are responsible for much of that wisdom, along with the innovation that turns it into the practical know-how that is the engine of ClubMap's proven approach. Terry Dillon is also a ClubMap founder, and he's our CEO. He spent a lifetime dedicated to sport, starting at the mighty Coralline Cobras Football Netball Club, where he played as a junior and senior. 311 games, I think, TD, and where he's still on the board as vice president, as well as spending nearly 2 decades as a senior AFL executive at St Kilda, Collingwood and Hawthorn footy clubs. Ken Jacobs is another sporting lifer. Ken was CEO of Cricket Victoria for nearly 30 years and took on government relations for Tennis Victoria for over 7 years. He's also a director of Cricket Without Borders. For the past couple of years, Ken's been sharing his wisdom with ClubMap and the general sporting community. John Knudsen is ClubMap's Chief Operating Officer and another with a lifetime in sport. Before joining ClubMap, John worked alongside Terry at Hawthorn Footy Club in the AFL, and he's on the board of his local club, the amazing Heathmont Jets Football Netball Club, where he's Director of Netball. I'll pass you over now to the safe hands of Terry, Ken and John. TD?
Good on you, Mark. Thanks, everybody. We've got a lot to cover. Look, there's a fair bit in this, and this will be very interactive. Hopefully we can all learn from each other, and there's a lot of experience. And this is the first webinar series we're specifically focusing on governing bodies, and it's after a series of working with different state bodies and different governing bodies that we realise there's some challenges in that space. So there's a 3-part component, and we'll do a poll in a second, but the framework of today's session is we're going to go for about 40 minutes. There will be a recording. We will have some questions after the 40 minutes if people wish to throw questions to the floor. But literally, we're going to walk you through the lay of the land. We've worked with well over 100 governing bodies in the last handful of years. And we're also going to talk about, we've identified some gaps in the market in terms of education for our governing bodies and our administrators. So today's topic, as Mark said, is specifically about board structure and administration. And the last piece of the puzzle is all about how do we help? How do we make sport more sustainable and contemporary across the country? Because we have too many sports that are under pressure and they need support, and they've hit a brick wall in that regard. Before we kick into the meat and potatoes of the whole session, Jono, can you put up the poll? I'd encourage everyone to participate in this poll, because the whole part of this process is to learn from each other. So hopefully that's come up on your screen now. The first one says, do you believe your governing body is on the right path to long-term sustainability? So if you can answer that. The second question is, do you currently have all required skill sets on your board? We do have a lot of boards who have gaps in their various structures, and we'll touch on that as we go through the session. Do all directors or board have a dedicated portfolio? We have a lot of directors who are generally helping, but do they have a specific portfolio? And the last question we're going to ask, does your organisation have a current strategic plan? It's interesting. I've been working while we just go through these polls and get the results. I did a session with a national body, 2 national bodies on the weekend, national bodies, Australia in their name, and they didn't have a strategic roadmap, didn't have a plan. And we're talking, and again, that's not saying it's inconsistent, but it's reasonably consistent with a lot of the sports that we work with. And today is very much about learning from each other and sharing some information. So, John, why don't we just end that poll and at least share the results with the attendees before we get into the meat and potatoes of it all. Okay, all righty. Do you believe is it being shared, John? Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Do you believe your governing body is on the right path to long-term sustainability? 24% are saying yes. 75% are saying either somewhat, no, or unsure. Somewhat worries me a little bit because they're not quite sure. So that's interesting stat in its own right. Do you currently have all the required skill sets? 24% are saying yes. Again, similar stat to above. There's obviously some gaps. 40% of the governing bodies are saying there's gaps in their structure. And then you have not really unsure, which is, sort of speaks for itself. Do all directors have a dedicated portfolio? 1 in 3. For me, that's, again, not saying it's a red flag, but it's something that we're going to talk about the importance today. Why people who sit on boards, and it's about having the right skills, etc., to accommodate that. Does your organisation have a current strategic plan? Well, I'm pretty impressed with this. 2 out of 3 have a strategic plan. That is a tick, and it's just great to hear that. So I think it's really important to have that information to get an understanding of what's happening in the landscape, because some of our organisations we deal with, I think it's just them. Oh, is this just us, or is this others? So we're going to kick into the session, but basically why we're running this series. Look, we work with lots and lots of governing bodies. We work with one state body where we had 60 SSOs participate. We work with a lot of independent reviews with a lot of data. We're going to simplify the data today. There's a lot more meat on the bones that we could share at another time, but today's very much about high level. And we always talk about the elephant in the room, the support for our governing bodies. Where do they go for support? A lot of them are lean in their own right. They're a state body, and they may have, some of our national bodies and state bodies have minimal full-timers, some have none. And ultimately, where do they go for support? And hopefully our role is, okay, some of our governing bodies are surviving. And I say that hand on heart, that, let's see how we can build a model to make them thrive. But it really is, and I ask this question a lot, why isn't this gap filled in Australian sport? Because a lot of our sports do not know where to go for help. So obviously we've been doing this a long time. My background is professional sport, as Mark said. So really we feel like we're hopefully going to fill a bit of a void in the market. Our definition of a governing body, and probably what we're talking about today, is the top 4 levels. We've got national bodies under pressure. We've got state bodies under pressure. We've got some sports that are hubs and regions, and then you have the lower tiers, whether it's a league or association. And a lot of our governing bodies, I'm not saying they need help, definitely in many cases, but ultimately their role is to support the community organisations as well, their grassroots clubs. And typically, I'm not saying they're set up to fail, but they don't have the resources to really reach out to support their community clubs. But, it really is a significant pain point, and we'll go through the various data that we captured. So this is sort of a high-level summary, and this is all about board assessment. And we've asked 100 organisations what are the pain points, and we started with, you can see what's being circled. So I'll go through the 4 bigger pain points, which is board structure. It's talking about board portfolios. We talk about board skill sets, putting the square pegs in the square holes, and succession. And we've got a lot more data than that, but we thought it was really important to summarise it. And board structure, and most organisations are run by 3 or 4 people doing 90% of the work. A lot of our boards are very much operation focused. As the survey showed, we've got a lot of gaps in our structures, portfolio gaps. And typically, as I said, that very much don't necessarily have a huge eye to the future. The fact that we had 2 and 3 have a strategic plan is a good tick. The skill sets, there's some real specific skills that are required to run a sporting organisation Australia-wide. And Ken's, highly experienced, nearly 3 decades and been life in sport. The portfolios, really, really important, and succession. And we will touch on succession. All these points we will touch on during today's session. But that for me says a lot. This is the board assessment. So we're then going to go to the staff assessment. And as I said, some of our sports don't have any administrators. and they are looking for support. But many don't know where to go. So obviously you've got the stability of administration. We find there's a high turnover of people in this particular space. The volunteer support, we're going to give you some tips in the second part of the session that every single not-for-profit organisation in the country should be aware of in terms of tapping into funding for your volunteers, particularly those to help execute your plans that are obviously hopefully developed by the board. Obviously, staffing levels. Again, typically 1 or 2 staff for some of the levels, and some have got more. Today, we're probably focusing more on tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 sports, not necessarily tier 1. And also we find a lot of our sports would love to be able to support their clubs in a club development program, but they're managing their own issues. And typically, it's more about a reactive response rather than having a proactive program to support their clubs. So that sort of sets the scene there. I might go to you, Jono, and Jono can talk about, I suppose, a typical example of some of the boards that we deal with across the country, Jono.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. So obviously, whether it's a byproduct of or a contributing factor towards those stats is the current situation with many leagues and associations in particular, but as Terry mentioned, even some NSOs and SSOs all sort of experience all these sort of pain points. So no clear understanding of roles and responsibilities, minimal portfolios matching those skill sets required, no succession planning. There was a couple of good questions that came through about succession planning, which we'll get to later on. Majority of the work done by 3 or 4 people, particularly in those lower tier sports, limited resources, often very operations focused as well. They get caught up in the day-to-day and having to do all the work as the board, as opposed to looking towards the future. And then an organisational structure that looks something like they're, again, just adapted to your basic executive up the top and a few general board directors underneath with no set portfolios and very, very little sort of future focus in their portfolios at all. So that's the current situation, and that's where we can hopefully, through some intervention today and some tips and some information, is share some different examples and tips on how to expand your structure out and perhaps optimize it.
That model there explains exactly the survey we did a few minutes ago, that we have directors who don't have portfolios. We think it's really important that everyone, there's often a gap in state and national bodies of commercial, where someone wearing a commercial hat, typically one of the most important hats with the finance and governance and legal and risk and so forth, and obviously the experts inside the field. This is what we have identified. There needs to be a circuit breaker, clearly, in Australian sport. The 6 topics you can see down the bottom, they're the pain points. And we've put 3 little bullet points under each. That is what our sport needs support about. Obviously, today is very much about board administration. And again, we're going to, for the rest of the year, we're going to dive into more about the how. I'd like to think our organisation provides very practical solutions based on serious senior experience at high-level professional sport. And we're going to go through that. So as a consequence of that, we're going to run these webinars every month for governing bodies. Once a month, last Tuesday of every month. Obviously, today's about board administration. But again, it goes back to the starting point. Where does our organisations go for support? 9 out of 10 people who are administering sport across Australia aren't actually taught this stuff. Yes, they do bring great life skills to the table, but there's some serious gaps in a lot of this. And hopefully we can, during the year, we'll be able to fill a lot of that. And we've probably got some attendees that have sat in our normal webinar series. We've delivered well over 100 odd webinars to our grassroots clubs, but we're now compelled to support our community, our governing bodies. So the next one is a month today, or 4 weeks, last Tuesday in November, we'll be planning. So, but again, that's pretty much where it's at. So part 2 of the session is all about, okay, here's some tips. How do we improve? We've talked about the lay of the land. How do we improve the landscape? Obviously, the 4 tips on the left are all to do with the board. The 4 tips on the right are all to do with the administration or the part-time volunteers or full-time volunteers that are supporting their organisation. So, typically, most of these organisations, the weight or the burden does fall on too few, and consequently, that results in burnout and turnover of good quality people. And often these roles, and 99% of roles at governing body and state body, particularly at board level, they're volunteers. They're not getting paid. This is a volunteer role. And they're juggling family, club and work at the same time. So ultimately, but what we're finding is we're losing too many good people because of that. Anyone who sits in our sessions for years, this is the goal. This is the silver bullet right here. Until you get your structure sorted, whether it's local level, whether it's leagues, whether it's associations, whether it's state bodies, whether it's national bodies, everything is too hard. You can't execute a lot of the initiatives that we will potentially put across your desk until you get your structure right. Typically, most organisations have that old-fashioned structure: president, secretary, treasurer, BP, general committee, general board. So obviously that's what we're saying is really, really important. So we do promote a 3-tiered structure. We're going to give you a couple of examples. I was a bit reluctant to put it in, but Jono convinced me to put it in the second part. But we do promote a 3-tiered structure for boards. We're not going to go into the detail of boards and what it all encompasses, and it varies from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. Typically, we're a big believer you need a 3-tiered structure. You need tier 1 being the decision makers, the executive review board, the decision makers. Then you'll have the second tier, which are people who have a role. I'm a big believer, if you don't have a role, specific role, might be saying wrong here, but I don't think you necessarily need to be on a board to have that. We need the right skill sets across the organisations to serve the organisation. And we just find time and time again, I think the survey poll up front told us, didn't it? It told us that we got lots of gaps. And the bottom level, I think it's the greatest missed opportunity in community sport. People think you need to be on a board to help. A lot of people don't want to go on a board, but it doesn't mean they can't contribute. So again, we promote, and Jono's going to walk you through this. This is an example of a league and association level and a bit of a before and after, but there's I'll get Jono to talk to it, but there's a lot of variations in this, but Jono's going to give you one example, Jono.
Yeah, so we've just slotted in a couple of examples, and obviously there's there's no perfect situation. It's not a cookie cutter sort of structure for different organisations, whether it's a league, association, state body, etc. So this was just a good example of something that we worked through with an organisation not too long ago, where they had a very operations focused board, management committee, and very little future focus, no paid resources in the large league and association that they ran. And then after some recommendations and all those sort of things, we came out with a structure that sort of built out a 3-level, built towards the 3 levels where, and again, there's horses for courses depending on the size and annual level, but having a board in place where there's portfolios supporting a future focus, some paid resources in the middle, and then some volunteer subcommittees down below. And again, depending on the organisation, we'll have a discussion about subcommittees a little bit later on, TD, but I think just by expanding out the depth of the roles and the portfolios on that board, it's allowed them to take a step back from the operations and have a greater focus on the future. And by having a greater commercial lens on the organisation, they're able to justify and be viable enough to employ a couple of full-time resources in there as well. So going from what's on the left to what's on the right is a big step towards that sustainability of this organisation as a whole.
I might just jump in there, John. This is a perfect organisation. I won't say which one it is, but they had 5,000 participants. They weren't making 1 cent from commercial sponsorship revenue. They had a huge, social media following, but they didn't know how to commercialise it, right? So again, an organisation of that size should have been making a 6-figure sum amount, at least at the minimum. And again, they had no full-time administrators. So ultimately, it was all about tweaking the model, being more strategic, more focused, getting the square pegs in the square holes and getting the right skills. So again, now we're going to move to national state body. Like, this can be how long is a piece of string. So look, obviously, you really need the blue are the decision makers that I talked about earlier. The green are those that, we talk about subcommittees, and it depends on how big the organisation, whether you need a subcommittee. If you're quite a large organisation, I think it definitely has some merit. Whether you merge governance and finance and risk together, or commercial. But again, some of our organisations struggle to fill their positions on the board, let alone fill a subcommittee. So that's sort of a bit of the chicken and the egg, isn't it? So I think we do find, I suppose, our message here at national level or state level is to have the right skills. And do you have someone with there's no legal hat here, but a legal hat or a governance hat or a finance hat, or the strategic hat, etc. No, we've got governance and finance here, but again, it's really, and it's so important to get this right. And I just want to say one thing which I find strange, not strange, but it's quite consistent. 9 out of 10 organisations we work with don't have a visual structure. They don't promote their structure. They might have a list of names on their website, but for some reason they don't make it public. Because you know what? Often people see how hard 3 or 4 people are working, and they go, you've got to be careful here. If I get too close, I could end up in a big black hole I can't get out of, and all of a sudden they're the chairman, right? Or they're the vice president. But I think when people see a visual structure and the load being broken down, then they see that can be the one piece of a bigger puzzle. And it's really a key piece of that. So I think that sort of sets the scene for that. Obviously, the skill sets, getting the square pegs in square holes. If you're going to have someone to oversee your finance as a finance director, or they need to have some background in finance, as a brief example. Every role should have a PD. I think that should be straightforward. Some of our sports don't have that, but that should be a minimum standard. Other common recommendations working with governing bodies, PDs we talked about, matching the portfolios, the board should have a future focus, a little bit more future than operations. If you do have any subcommittees, I'd really encourage you to have some charters. So what are the role of those people that sit inside that subcommittee so they stay in their lane? We have a lot of organisations that they get outside of their lane. By having a charter, is really just it's like a PD for the subcommittee. What are their responsibilities? What is their boundaries? And obviously independent decision making. And what I do find with a lot of sports, typically people who are representing the board are wearing a hat for club land or league land or association land. It's nearly impossible to remove that, total independence. But ideally, that's what you should have. And I've obviously having a succession plan. Administration, the gaps we've talked about, PDs, how to commercialise the model, their state model and their national model. A lot of our organisations are still use their technology is way behind the times, and it's impacting the effectiveness of the administration. We're going to talk about volunteers and the importance. Appreciate 99.9% of people who sit on sporting boards Australia-wide are volunteers, unless you're an executive chairperson. I think, tapping into some funding for volunteers is really important, which we're going to touch on a little bit today. And we do find a lot of our governing bodies that they'd love to be able to help their clubs more by having a club support program. What does that look like? We'll touch on a little bit that later, but they just can't. They're just not. I'm not saying they're putting out fires, but we have a lot of sports that do great stuff, but they often want to do more. They see their clubs are battling a little bit, but if you can provide that. So that's typically the challenges there. Look, we typically have a full-pronged attack for volunteerism, and I'm not sure if we don't have volunteer, we do webinars on volunteers, but obviously it's about getting the right people, and we do say promote your structure. Clubs and sports don't promote their structure for a reason, which I touched on earlier. And I mentioned earlier, a lot of our administrators and our board members, yes, they do bring life skills to the table, but there's some specific knowledge that will make your life so much easier if similar to those list of webinars we showed earlier. But again, 9 out of 10 people running sport across Australia aren't taught this stuff. That's not a red flag. I've never heard of one, right? And again, people are doing their best. They're fending for themselves. But again, we're not expecting people to work harder. But we said, hopefully we can help you work smarter. That's the role that we play. The bottom one is a real key point, which is, we won't go into the details today because that's a webinar on its own, but there is funding out there for people that are 55 years and over, pre-pension, to work 30 hours a fortnight to help your organisation administratively, to help you do what you need to do. We talked about your structure earlier, and you might have some operational gaps. And again, if you can tap into and there's no limit to the number of people you can have, people that are paid $17,000 per annum through the federal government, that is a game changer. Yes, there's a bit of red tape to get through, but once you're through, you're through. And then it's like anything, any employment, you've got to get you find the right people, they will be gold. And if you can get 3 or 4 or 5 people that can help work 30 hours a fortnight to help your organisation, whether you're a league, association, or a state or national body, that is literally a game changer. So again, we'll touch on that during the series as we go through. Jono, you can jump in here, mate.
So quite often the board's role is misunderstood as well. So it's not only the portfolios, but it's also making sure that you're having that future focus as opposed to being too operations focused. And the nature of sport and funding around the country as well it sort of lends itself towards a participation focus instead of future proofing the sport as a whole and organisation. So we've got a bit of a seesaw in action here. This is how it is currently, sort of 90%, well, it's going to tick back in a second, but 90% is weighted towards participation, growth and focus, and 10% towards governing body and club development. This one here, 50% each way. That's we think that the balance could be a bit more in the middle. Again, getting the balance right means that you're putting a bit more time, effort and resources into developing your governing body and your community clubs so that the participation growth is sustainable.
John, I just want to jump in there. Every sport we deal with, there's state and national bodies driving participation, but if you're driving the numbers, you've got to have the back of house to sort the numbers. Ken, I might go to you if I don't mind. So Ken's a former 27 years CEO of Cricket Victoria plus Life in Sport. Do you want to talk to me about your time, Ken, and what your thoughts are on this component of it?
Well, look, certainly I think the focus on participation, as you said, has become paramount for most sports, and I understand all the reasons why. But when you go down that path, you sometimes take your eye off the ball in other areas for the longer term to secure the sport. And you can also have that can have a dramatic impact on volunteers as well, because if the governing body has a participation on focus, they might be driving clubs to introduce new programs to increase participation, and that can have an impact on volunteers. Who's going to do all the work? And so forth. And as I said, you can on occasions take your eye off the ball in terms of what's the longer term strategy for the governing body in being able to grow the sport, but at the same time secure the sport, have all the right people involved, and from a governing body perspective, to also then be in a position where you can really help provide some positive help and material help to your clubs and associations.
Awesome, Kent. So part one was all about the lay of the land. Look, there's some sports that are going well. A lot of sports need extra support. Number two, hopefully we've provided at least some framework around some solutions. But part three is all about what we think is potentially a solution for our national and state and governing bodies. So in terms of making us sustainable, you know, a lot of our organisations we did surveys with, their sustainability was under pressure, really under pressure. And so we promote two paths. One, typically it could be the governing body needs their own direct support. And we'll go through what that means in a second. They would love to be able to support their clubs, but they need to get their own house in order sorted first and foremost. Number two is then the ability to support clubs. So governing body support, this is a bit of a journey. It's a bit interesting chart. John, we pulled this together today, but we're going to provide everyone today a free health check. We've developed this online platform, and can I encourage anyone who's participating in today to do the 15-minute health check, to at least know where your organisation is at. Just to be clear, what we do as an organisation is off field, off pitch, off water, off court. That's our wheelhouse. So if you feel your governing body needs some help, you know, it could be an independent review or strategic planning or business planning. The one on the right, we're really excited about, and we're going to go through that. And we've made a big announcement in the last week of national body aligned to that, plus some councils, plus some league and association in the recent times. But at the very least, your journey as a governing body should be to do that health check. So, Jono, how are we going to access that? Is that we're going to send out?
So we'll have a poll at the end if you want some more information, or if you want to complete the free health check, and we'll send you a unique link. So just yeah.
Here's some examples. Here's some examples of independent reviews. It's a pretty hands-on approach. Combination of surveys, one-on-one interviews, and out third party assessing the organisation where it's at. There's some examples. Like this report here, Q Sport. We interviewed 59 SSOs to be exact. And I think we've got a lot of other different sports, soccer and other Queensland Rifle and AFL and so forth. So some of our organisations need their review because a lot of our organisations know something's not quite right, but it's hard to fix something when you don't know what's broken, right? We also obviously do strategic planning. There's some examples of strategic planning is there. We also, and again, this is part two. This is where, and John, we might we're going to do the poll later, or we'll do the poll now. Actually, we'll do the poll this first.
Yeah, walk through this first, I think.
Yeah, actually, I might get Mark to walk through this, Mark, because this is where I think the future of Australian sport is here. A lot of our sports can't afford to invest in arms and legs and people on the road to support their organisation. So, Mark, do you want to talk to this, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure, TD. I think it's interesting when we've spoken to people who've sat in their first Club Map webinar, their first interaction with us, and they say, gee, there's so much to it. You know, I don't even know where to start. I can tell you where to start. We have to start with structure. It can be a little bit daunting, perhaps, to think, well, it's great to talk about structure. I've got to populate a structure. I've got to find all these people to do all these jobs. How do I pay for it? Well, part of what we do is we've come up with, it's now 2023, it's not 1970 anymore, and we teach people how to find the revenue that's necessary to support that structure. So by doing that, we're taking pressure off everybody from the top of the pyramid to the bottom of the pyramid. And you can see the bottom one there says finances. It's often a starting point for people because there's no pressure like financial pressure. Those of us who've spent some time thinking, how in the hell am I going to pay the bills this month, know that that can be the biggest stumbling block. So our starting point is structure. It has to always be structure. Once we've got that in place, we can then move on to building that fantastic and sustainable future that we all know and love. So there are some elements to it. And we can supply most of those elements. We can't roll up our sleeves and do the actual work, but we can give you the tools. One of the most important tools is the online health check. Everybody should do that, whether you're a club, a league association, or you're right at the top tier. It gives you an insight because it's a subjective analysis. You are analysing your own situation, and it's incredible how honest people are when they answer these questions, and what a fantastic snapshot it gives of an organisation. Then we can report on it. Then we can offer the education to you. Then we can put some webinars around the education that's necessary. We can even run some workshops for whatever level of the pyramid needs it. And of course, we've got our 24, or not 24/7, but 12-month support at the other end of the phone. And this goes for everybody. So it allows everybody to play the actual role that they're supposed to be playing. Governing bodies can focus on their core business. And as 2D has so rightly pointed out, part of your core business, if you're running the place, is looking to the future, not getting mired in the operational. We also work with a lot of councils. Councils find themselves in the same boat. There are lots of people knocking on the door saying help. Well, councils can gain more value from their own resources, whether they be club development people or support focused people. The development staff gain more value from their roles because people start to speak the same language because they're educated. And those educated people grow their clubs and help their clubs thrive because suddenly they've got some education that's focused on what they're actually needing to do, which is run their clubs better. Revenue increases. There's a return on investment figure bouncing around 2D. I don't know whether you want to go there, but certainly we do help people see some incredible increases in their revenue. And what happens when you get all of these parts working together is participation increases. We find that clubs and sports are more attractive to people. Yeah. So there's a pick and pack option here, really. We like to call it pick and pack because it's not a cookie cutter. It's not the same for everyone. There are similar opportunities and similar challenges, but the way people want to address them can be different. So we offer different options for people. And once you've had a chat to Terry or Ken or Ricky, who's our expert in this sort of stuff, you get some guidance around what's necessary and what's not. And I would suggest that at the very minimum, tick the box to do the health check, and it sort of sets you on the road. It at least gives you a bit of an idea of what's wrong, because we know that unless you know what's wrong, you can't fix it.
Thanks, Mark. This is an example, 4 different examples in front of you right now. Jono, you might bring up the poll. I'm talking to this. So people who may want some extra support. The one at the top is Bowls Australia. You would have seen Bowls Australia. So if everyone could just yay or nay, if you just want to complete the survey, if you want a health check or you want to chat with anyone from our organisation. But this is the future of Australian community sport in club development and supporting governing bodies. This is 4 live examples. I can actually mention the names here. NSO, that's Bowls Australia. It's a pick and pack. The second one is Burdekin Council in Queensland. 100 clubs, they're doing a health check. All our resources, which we'll touch on. This is a council in Perth, City of Stirling, and this is a AFL league in Victoria. That's literally just happened recently. This is the Bowls Australia announcement. So we've been working with Bowls for probably 6 to 8 weeks. We announced it formally a week or so ago. So it just shows that we'll be working with 1,800 of their clubs through webinars. Everyone will do a health check. Everyone will access their education. This is our health check that we talked about. So anyone who's doing the survey, if you can complete that, that's up at the moment. But here's your health survey, which is 15 minutes. If you're a governing body representative, I'd encourage you to spend 10 to 15 minutes to do that. And even if you've done it in the past, I'd encourage you to do it again because the health check has changed recently. Obviously, we're going to offer a free health check, which John and I will talk about. This is the area I think every governing body should be aware of. This is going to change the landscape of education Australia-wide. There's nothing like this in the country. So we've spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy in bringing everything online about practical solutions on how to implement grant writing, structure, volunteers, sponsorship, fundraising. There's 100 odd short 2-minute videos. There's lots of downloadable templates. You can access any of our webinars that we record over the 12-month period. So for us, that is setting the standard Australia-wide. There's nothing like that. So I might even play you a little thumbs up. Can you hear that?
I'm Alex from ClubMap.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Resources Hub, the most comprehensive online learning platform available to community organizations. There's a lot of content inside the Resources Hub, so let me take a moment to show you around. After logging in, you will land on a page that looks like this. Click on Access Resources Hub to get started. Here's how to navigate the platform. On the left-hand side, you will see the different topics covered in the Resources Hub. Below, you will also find our latest webinar recordings. These are updated year-round, every time we run a free webinar. Click on any topic to see what content is inside. Each topic features a combination of short videos, written content, examples, and editable templates. Some videos have downloadable templates or examples attached to them, denoted by the paperclip icon on the left-hand side. To access these attachments, click on the small paperclip icon in the top right.
That should give you a bit of a gist of what's happened. And look, that's obviously the introductory video of the topic that we're delivering. Jono, do you want to talk about the Resources Hub? Because people might want to have a free trial of this. So
Yeah, so just so that you can get a bit of an idea of what's involved and what's included, I've just put the link in the chat there, hub.clubmap.com.au. Feel free to jump on there, click on the blue button, access free trial, and you can jump in. There's just a handful of videos, handful of templates, handful of information pages that you can have a look through. I think a webinar recording as well. So you can jump in there and have a look. And We're pretty proud of. I mean, we've had the Resources Hub for quite some time now, but we're pretty proud of where we've been able to take it. And we've only just recently reskinned everything and updated a stack of the content. So feel free to jump in, create a free account, and trial the Resources Hub there. So obviously, just working through that.
alrighty, I'll keep jumping around a bit. So we might just summarise the session, and I'm going to take a few questions. Mark, do you want to summarise, I suppose, the theme of today, and then we'll take some questions that have already been thrown.
Yeah, thanks, TD. I think, to me anyway, the theme harks back to one of our original slides, which is there's an elephant in the room, that we all talk about helping clubs and helping sports, but it's the top of the pyramid that probably needs some help too, because the model it's using, it's outdated, and we've come to this realisation. It's 2023 now, and it's time for a change. So that starts, as we mentioned before, with the structure. Until you have the structure right, everything is hard, because so many of us want our sport to thrive, and we see participation as the way to that. What we really need to do, though, is build a structure behind it, behind the whole support, and then the participation will come about as a natural consequence. So it's almost counterintuitive, but if we've got an operational focus, it actually hinders our growth. If it stops us from working on our sport, and it just doomed us to working in it. We're patching holes instead of building a new boat. And organisations reflect their leadership. I'm really strong on this. Any organisation reflects the people at the top, okay? Now, if you are a forward thinker, if you are embracing technology, if you've got an eye to the future, guess what? That's how your organisation will be. So think about the pyramid, and think about how you want that pyramid to look, and embrace the future. Thanks,
Mark. Just another reminder, this webinar series will be last Tuesday of every month except for January. These are the different topics. And, if you feel that you've got other governing bodies that should participate, then that would be great. So, Jono, do you want to fire away? You got any questions online there, mate?
Yeah, so we did have a few really good questions that came through the Calendly registration. So I think one to kick off, perhaps, I might throw this to either yourself, Ken, or TD, from a good friend of Club Map, James at Pickleball Australia. Some clubs have benefited by having a president role and a chair role, so outward facing versus inward facing, as it allows for different personalities and skills. What are your thoughts on that, Ken? I might start with you, or TD.
Sure, thanks, John. Look, I've had experience at Cricket Victoria when we had for quite a while, we had a president and a chair, and it worked very well. But we were bound to under the Constitution. But they were two very different people. The president was very much an outward, sort of reasonably flamboyant type of person. The chairman was I suppose you'd describe him as a very good chairman, good solid citizen, but a bit insular. And in the sport of cricket, we needed to have someone who could fly the flag a little bit for us if need be, and that was the role of the president, not the chair. But the president also sat on the board with the chairman.
Yeah,
It can vary from sport to sport,
yeah,
and the personnel you've got involved too.
Yeah, and it can be the personalities blend needs to work as well. I think often can, but what we find is having a outward looking, having someone to focus on the future strategy of the organisation. That makes good sense. It might be someone chairing an advisory board, and then someone who's the president who oversees the operational aspects of running the club. So, or the various clubs that sit underneath it. But yeah, good question, Jono.
And we did have a couple of questions around different governing structures. There was a few around essentially what's our view on the federated versus unified NSO governing structure. I know you've had some experience with that, Ken, in the past as well.
Yes, John. Cricket as a sport has traditionally been had a federated model, but now it's more on the operates on the still has that federated sort of structure, but operationally and strategically, it operates under a unified model. Now there are some pluses and advantages with that. As from the top at the national body, it's all fine, but as you go down through the structure, you can lose, particularly at state level, you can lose a little bit of your own autonomy as such in terms of what you might want to do. Not completely, but it can happen, and you're bound then to follow precisely what the national body wants, whether you agree or disagree with them. If you're into that national unified model, that's the way you have to go. But look, that's certainly seems to be the modern path. But there are still federated structures in place in some sports that work quite well.
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Ken. I think, what was the next one? This is probably we've sort of touched on it a little bit, but maybe for you, TD, from Judy, how to recruit people with the right expertise for roles. I know we sort of touched on it briefly, but maybe that 4-step process is the best one to follow.
It's about identifying the right person to do the asking to start with. I think it's really important when you do the asking that the person you're asking to support your organisation, they see a visual structure of what they're walking into, because a lot of people don't know what they are walking into some of the time. And I think it's really important that you have a position description that goes along with that, so they know exactly what their role will be. I think in this day and age, my advice to committees and boards is you've got to be flexible. So I'm the vice president of my community club in Country Victoria. Don't go to any training, or I'm not around a lot, but I help oversee. But if I was required to be there all the time, I wouldn't be involved. So obviously technology helps. We've all moved to the technological world. I sit in a lot of meetings. I'm help involved actively in the organisation. But I think making sure you have that visual structure, the 3 tiers we talked about, you want to share the load and have some flexibility is my advice.
And then one from Kelly, just asking, what are the main ingredients of a succession planning toolkit?
Ideally, if you're going to have succession planning, there's a few things I think you need to have in place. The person who's coming in, hopefully you've got a roadmap, a framework that they can follow, at least look at and have an idea of the path that's being proposed to move forward. I think it's really important, particularly at governing body level, you have a clear structure that everyone knows exactly what they're doing. Again, have that as a visual structure. Don't just have a list of names that sits on someone's website. Where do they fit in those 3 tiers that I talked about? But again, obviously the handover is a key. But if you've got a roadmap and you can educate them on the way through, I think having an actual toolkit, I like it. But I think let's keep it simple. I give them a roadmap, give them some clear structure, and they know what they're walking into. I think that's half the battle.
Yeah, to a degree. I just saw Gail's question pop up in the chat there. Does ClubMap fit those sports that operate in a commercial venue and have 3 different association models operating in the same state? I believe you're referring to 10-pin bowling. If I am
spread it out, miss that, John.
Sorry, does ClubMap fit though? Yes, sorry, go. Yes. Does ClubMap fit those sports that operate in a commercial venue, basically?
100%.
So an association that works within a commercial 10-pin bowling venue.
We just finished a huge review of a large basketball association with 2 hospitality venues, and we reviewed not just their sport. We reviewed their management agreements, their leasehold agreements, their freehold, their rental agreements, and we did a complete review of that. That was a pretty significant operation. It was a 3-month review. That was, again, but without speaking out of school, I think based on our assessment, we saved that organisation $3 to $4 million a year. Because can't mention names, but it's that was some time now, and it's definitely applies to commercial related venues such as what you talked about.
Yeah, we've even worked with a few smaller organisations, associations, and clubs who sort of work within that model as well, where it's a slightly different framework. But I think that's probably about all we got time for, I reckon, today. We've sort of done about 10 to 15 minutes of questions, but unless anyone has any last minute questions you want to throw in the chat,
I might just, while we just wind this, Jono, anyone who's got Facebook, while we wind up, I'd encourage you to like the one on the left. The one on the right is a terrific page where communities can solve problems amongst themselves. So I think we've got, I don't know how many, 1,500, 2,000 who follow this community page. So if you're a club or a sport that's looking for some tips from inside our own ClubMap community, that's the one on the right. But anytime there's new initiatives or new grants or new offers, we post it on the left. So I really encourage everyone to be a part of that. So there's our details on the right-hand side. If anyone wants to give me a call directly, happy to do so. The emails there is info@clubmap, but I think we should wind it up there. But hopefully you got some value out of today. Thank all our presenters. Look, we feel privileged to work in this space because we know we make a difference. And it's no trouble getting out of bed for our crew because we're working with community organisations every day of the week, and we are filling a massive need. And we just want to obviously spread the word in terms of, we've got a lot of sporting bodies out there that need help, but they don't know where to go. And hopefully our education, our webinars will be a piece of that puzzle, part of your journey. Again, I'll wind it up by saying, can I encourage everyone to do the health check? If you're here today and you spent the time to commit to the health check, it'll be time well spent. It'll allow you to assess your governing body in a different light. And you'll probably be asking questions you've never been asked, and you'll get a really good summary of exactly what your actions could be or should be moving forward. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll jump out. We've had 40 minutes for the session. The rest is just for the Q&A, but this is our first go at this governing body webinar. So hopefully it was well received, and hope to see the second one in about 4 weeks' time. Over and out. Thanks, guys.